Hello everyone. Welcome to CSC Stock's Command Line Tools Workshop presented by Callum Howard. Thanks for coming. And yep, Callum, take it away.
All right. Thanks everyone for being here. Today we're going to learn some command line tools. It's my first time doing a virtual workshop like this, but I have done this workshop before for the last few years. Done it about 4 times. For some background, I am an ex-student of UNSW, Computer Science and Digital Media Art. And I've worked at a few different places now. I've worked at, interestingly, a place called Animal Logic. And they're a film studio that are responsible for the Lego Movie, The Matrix, lots and lots of different movies, or at least the visual effects for those movies. And I worked on Captain Marvel, the VFX for Captain Marvel, and also Lego Movie 2. Now I work at a place called Safety Culture, which is a startup in Surrey Hills. And I love it there. And so that's me. Today we're going to get into command line tools, and I have set up a little bit of some documentation. So the way it works is there's going to be a lot of information here, and it might be hard for you to remember it all, right? Or to absorb it. There's lots of things you might miss, but my aim is that I want to show you what's possible, show you these command line workflows, get you interested. And if you can't remember the details, that's fine, because hopefully I will have them all listed out here. And of course, you can ask me anytime if you have any questions. I also have, let's see here, I'll plug my page that's called CSE Vim Users, but we also talk about command line stuff here. So if you're interested, feel free to join that community as well. Lots of people asking questions and getting help from each other. So feel free to join that if you like. So first up, hopefully this will work, but we've created a few polls and I'd like to get just a little survey of you guys, see what operating systems you're using, what kind of your experience is, and also what you're interested to learn first, what you're most interested to learn about command line workflows. So I wonder if we can get those polls going. If I answer, I'm using Mac.
Callum, can you see the polls? Can you start them? Because I no longer.
Oh yeah, sure thing. Yeah, all right. Relaunch poll. Okay, let me try this. Launch poll. Okay, here we go. So hopefully on your screen right now, you'll see a poll and you can click the options. Awesome. This is always interesting. And during this workshop, feel free to unmute and ask me questions, or ask questions in the chat as well. A lot of times I'll gloss over something and not realize that I didn't explain it. And I'm more than happy to repeat anything as well. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's quite an even spread at the moment. We are equal Windows, Mac, and Linux. That's amazing. Now, I guess that you all would be using Linux to some degree, because if things haven't changed drastically, the assignments are still submitted on the CSE lab machines, right? So I suppose you might be using SSH or VNC to remote in. Is that right? Anyone confirm? Awesome, thumbs up. Cool. All right, well, I've got some tricks for SSH as well. Cool. Okay, so I think those are some good numbers. It's really an even spread. So Windows, Mac, and Linux. I'm curious with those, with you guys who are using Windows, if you're using like PuTTY or you're using Bash for Windows, WSL, or Git Bash or something else. What is your terminal emulator? Cool. So I think that's most of everyone except for the people who just joined, but that's okay. Let's jump on to the next poll just quickly. Windows is the winner. We've got 7 Windows. Hang on, let me see. Here's the results. 7 Windows users, 6 Mac users, 5 Linux users. Interesting. So I'm curious, not that you need to know Comp 2041, but I'm curious about your backgrounds. Like, are you guys in first year? Are you guys in final year? Who are you? So this is a bit of a binary question, but it doesn't fully represent that, but at least I get a little more of an idea. I should have come up with a better question, but great. All right. These are interesting results. Very interesting. All right. Welcome to the people who just joined. We're just doing some quick polls so I can understand a little more about you guys. So this is definitely good for me. I will try and take that into account when explaining the tools that I'm going to go through. 2041, it was one of my favorite courses at UNSW. It's where I learned scripting, and it's where I learned Git as well. And it's where I really got into using the command line. That's where my journey started. Cool. Okay, so let's try the next poll. So that's twice as many no's as yeses. So that's good to know. And then, so you might not completely know what all this is about, but just let me know which ones sound interesting to you, and we can start there. Great. It's looking good. All right, and while that poll's going, if you would like, you can open up a browser tab. You can go callumhoward.com/CLI workshop, that website there. If you go there, then you'll get the same page that I'm on, and you'll get all of this, which has some information. Now, some of it is pretty sparse, some of it is more detailed, but I'm going to continue adding to it when I have the time, and anyone else is welcome to contribute as well. Cool. So it looks like we have here in the polls, terminal emulator is number 1, SSH is number 2, and yeah, terminal multiplex is number 3, maybe Git and package manager. Okay, cool. I really like that. I'm going to leave that on another screen here so I can refer back to that. Okay. Oh, also, don't know if you guys use Git. Anyone use Git? Here's a little cool Chrome extension. Gives you a file browser. It's kind of handy for Git, so you can navigate different places. Okay, so let's get started. Let's get started with terminal emulator. Yep. So this is a really interesting one because if you're planning to spend time in your terminal, you really want to make it a place where you want to be, right? Now, I'm sure I don't have to, well, maybe I will demonstrate. I'll pick on Windows, but Windows command is like, it's so ugly, right? I mean, it's from a long time ago, so fair enough, but the font there is not a nice font to be working with, in my opinion, at least. And there's no color going on, right? Yeah, I don't know if you can see that, but it's not the nicest, but we can easily make it better. Like you don't have to have Mac, but if you do, the terminal emulator that I use is just the inbuilt one, terminal, and it works great. There's also other options like iTerm on Mac. Yeah. If you're on Linux, my go-to is the GNOME terminal, but there are plenty of options. GNOME terminal has been good enough for me. Another one that's pretty nice is Hyper terminal. So this is a terminal that looks pretty nice, and it's written in JavaScript, and it's available on Mac, Windows, and Linux because it's an Electron project. So it's written using JavaScript. And this is actually the same terminal that you'll see in VS Code, which is also a good option if you're on Windows, in my opinion. And this terminal down the bottom, VS Code, not sure what code's going to come up here. This is also Hyper.js, and it's also quite a good terminal. You can just full screen it there. You can hide all the other stuff, so you just have the terminal. if you don't go with another option, it's a good one. It supports full color, has full color support, full icon support. It's quite good. Okay, so if you're on Windows, you might be wondering what you can do, and that depends a bit. There is a new Windows terminal. You want to remember what it's called? Would it put it in the chat? I don't think I can see the chat actually. Nope, can't see the chat. Okay, but there's a new Microsoft Windows terminal, which is quite nice. They even made a weird ad for it, which is pretty intense. Yeah. Anyway, so you can look into that. The one I've been using before that came out, this new one supports colors and tabs, and it's much better than the old PowerShell one. Another one I have used in the past is Git Bash. But
Callum,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but there was just 2 questions in the chat. One is, you showed a Git extension, Chrome extension at the beginning. What was that?
Yes, absolutely. Good question. So that Git extension is called Octotree. So if you search for Octotree in Chrome extensions, you will find that. Yeah, and there's actually some good resources. I know it's not command line, but if you look up GitHub Chrome extensions, there's some, and you look at someone's blog where they've collected, or a YouTube video even. Yeah, I think I've watched this YouTube video and that's where I got it. And they just walk through, you can get dark mode, you can get icons, so that here you have icons on your folders, which is kind of nice. Not really useful here because these are not common file extensions, but if you look in another, let's see. Sometimes the icons work, yeah. And yeah, there's some nice extensions for Git there. So that one's called Octotree. That's great. And do we have another question?
Yeah, can you just make the font a bit bigger?
Absolutely, yep. So thanks. That's a good point. Thanks for saying that. Because I'm on quite a big screen here. Yeah, hopefully that's good. Just chuck that up a bit as well. Okay. So we were talking about Windows. Yeah, please do interrupt if there's any more questions because I can't figure out where to see. I've got too many desktops going on here and I can't find the chat. Cool. So Git Bash is a terminal for Windows, which is basically made for using with Git, but it supports some other basic things like changing directories and all sorts of stuff. I've used that one before and it's quite nice. Another one I've used is CMDER. This one is a pretty nice out-of-the-box console emulator. Has some nice styling and it supports using DOS, PowerShell, Git Bash, WSL, basically any of the terminal protocols or options that you have on Windows. And yeah, I reckon that's a good place to start if you don't know any, don't already have a favorite terminal emulator on Windows. Cool. All right. Also with terminal emulators, I think it's important to choose a nice font, right? I picked on Windows before because yeah, that is just, I know this is very small. Can we get a bigger? Yeah, here it's just a really ugly font. You can do so much better. So where can you find better fonts? Well, if you look at the Nerd Font project, this is Nerd Font. First on nerdfonts.com. So this is fonts for programmers. It also has icons. If you're not interested in the icons, you can get the versions that don't have the icons. All it means is that you can have icons in your terminal, like this kind of stuff, which I think is pretty cool. So there are a bunch of really nice fonts in this one. I'm just trying to find where that is. Well, maybe this is just the symbols. Wait, let me go back to the GitHub page. There we go. So here's a list of a lot of different fonts, and you can click here and check out what they look like. Like there's a few popular ones. Usually mono means monospaced, which is the kind of font that you want because you don't want a font that has different sizes for the characters. In a terminal, it's really useful just to have monospaced fonts. So yeah, there's a bunch of different options there, and you can go through and have a look which ones are nice. But if you want my recommendations, the one that I use is called Inconsolata. Inconsolata, yeah. So I actually use this one, and that's what you're seeing in my terminal over here. It has some nice features like the I's and the L's are made to look different. Let me see if I go to, basically these fonts are designed for programmers. So they make sure that the L and the I look distinct, the capital I, and they make sure that a 0 and an O, capital O, look different. Lots of stuff like that. It's so yeah, it's pretty good. I recommend getting a good font like that. Also for your terminal emulator, what else have we got? Here's some settings I've got. It's worth setting up some nice colors, but I won't get into too much of that because you guys might not have the same emulator as me. But you can look into that. So I've just set this font here yeah, it's worth taking a minute or so to go through your preferences and set that up. Cool. So that's terminal emulator. Let's move along. Now next we had SSH. Yes, SSH. I'm glad you guys are asking about that, because that's really going to be useful if you're wanting to SSH into the lab machine, right? So let's look at that. Remote computing. So I assume you guys have used SSH before. If you haven't, well, it's like being able to remotely sit at the terminal of a lab machine or a computer somewhere else. It stands for secure shell. And you might have logged into a CSE machine with like a ZID, like at csc.unsw or login.csc.unsw.edu.au, something like that. There's some cool configurations you can do to make that a little bit easier. For example, I don't actually have access to SSH into CSE anymore, unfortunately, but I do have my Raspberry Pi set up right behind here, actually, and I can SSH into, I think I can, oh, you know what? I don't have it set up on this computer. Well, this is a good opportunity. So what I'm going to quickly do is find out the IP address of my Raspberry Pi so I can demonstrate. But meanwhile, if you want to get up this SSH guide, remember the URL is callumhoward.com/CLI-workshop. If you go there, and then you scroll down to remote computing and click on that one, you'll get to this SSH guide, and we can go through this. Give me just a second. Okay. Okay. So this is good. Now, with SSH, the config is all set up in this hidden folder called .ssh. So if we cd into that, we'll see we've got a few files here, right? Now I have to be careful what I do, because I don't want to open these files and have some secure keys in them, but I can open the config, right? So what I'm doing is I'm using Vim here, and we see, okay, this is our config file for Vim. Not much added. Now I'm going to go through this guide and generate a key so I can SSH into my Raspberry Pi. Now, my Raspberry Pi I know is at this address. Yeah, I just realized this is not going to work because I don't have a key for the Raspberry Pi. Huh. Okay. Anyway, this is what I would do normally. I'd SSH in like this, right? And I'd put in a password, but I don't think any password will work because I've disabled it. Yeah. Okay. So you'll have to trust me, but instead of always typing out the host address like csc.unsw.edu.au, we can make this a little bit easier. So if we go into our .ssh config and we add an item here, right? This is going to be just like the guide. We're going to add an item and call it, I'm going to say the host is csc.unsw.edu.au, and we're going to say that the, actually let's call the host CSE. Then we have host name, me just confirm that I got this right. Okay, so it's camel case, host name, and then the host name is going to be your ZID. So something like that. And then, sorry, my mistake. The user is going to be your ZID. The host name is going to be csc.unix.edu.au. And we can leave it at that for now. So what you'll see is that then if you got the details right, obviously my details are not correct, then you can just go SSH CSE, right? You can use whatever the name you put here as the shortcut to SSH. And then it will ask you for your password, right? So what if we want SSH without asking for a password? Instead, we can generate a secure key and use this to authenticate instead of using a password. And that makes it really easy, especially if you have a long password and you don't like typing it out each time and you're connecting and reconnecting to SSH all the time. So what we can do is we can run a command like this and it will generate a key for us, right? If we run this command, and if you're copying this, I'm sorry, but you'll have to replace the quotes because they're the wrong kind of quotes. But what this is doing is it's saying, generate a key, which is just gonna look like random characters, right? And put it in this file. Inside our home directory, inside the .ssh directory, inside a folder, and inside a file called csc_id_rsa. And then this -t is saying we want to use RSA, and -b is saying we want lots of bytes of security. This -c is for comment. We can add a comment to remind us, remind ourselves what this key is for. So this is going to go on our computer and we're going to have a whole file full of keys, right? And if we put a comment there, we can remember, oh yeah, this one's for using with CSE. It'll ask you for a passphrase and it's optional. You can put a passphrase there if you want. If you don't have like a password on your computer, then it's probably a good idea to put a passphrase. But otherwise, the whole idea is that we're doing this so we don't need to put in a password. So I'm just going to leave it empty. Now it's generated a key. See, we've got this new key here called csc_id_rsa.pub. And we've also got one without the .pub. So .pub means public, and that means anyone can see this key and it's okay. It doesn't matter because even if they know the key, they can't log into your account. The one without the pub, that's a private key. That means that one should stay secret. So only you should know it. It should stay on your computer and it basically acts as the password. These two are a pair. So what we do is we send the public key up to CSE to sit on the lab machine, right? And then we keep the private key. When we log in, it will check the private key against the public key. And if they match, then it will let us in. So to be able to do that, that's all explained here, by the way. To do that, we run this command, SSH copy ID, and we point it to the one that we just made, specifically the public one. And then we use our normal CSE login. And then just to refresh your SSH program, so it has all those stored in its memory, you run something like this, depending on if you're on Mac or Linux. And yeah, then once you've done that, we can add in your SSH config, an identity file, and we can point it to where you generated that private key. So that's identity. Yeah.
Callum,
Yeah.
2 questions. So are you using ZSH as your shell?
Yep, that's right. Using ZSH. So yeah, I'm happy to show you all the tricks for that as well. Yep, that's correct. ZSH.
And is the public key the same to everyone?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Is the public key the same to everyone?
The public key is, each time you generate that key like that, it's a different key. So my public keys here, they're going to be completely different. Yeah, so basically they're not going to be the same for everybody. They're going to be completely different for each person because it's a pair. The private key pairs with the public key, and only those two together can unlock the login, right? So yeah, someone else's private key is not going to work with my public key. Yeah, good question though. Yeah.
One extra question. So how do you apply the customizations on your terminal in Vim?
In Vim, yes. So how do I apply these customizations to Vim? That's a good question. So if we look here in our home folder, we'll have this file called vimrc, right? And so we can add configuration to that vimrc, and I have lots of configuration. Probably too much to go into now. I've spent many years customizing it, I guess, but I will link you to my dot files, and that's here on my GitHub. So if you go to callumhoward.com, down the bottom here, you can click the GitHub icon, and we'll go to my GitHub. And on the front page there's dot files you can have a look at. And all my configuration files are here. So if you'd like to know how I got a certain thing, there's that there. And of course, happy to answer questions. You can join this CSC Vim users Facebook group, and or you can message me personally, ask me about any particular config you see. But yeah, basically it's just a lot of configuration that I put in this vimrc file. Yep. Does that answer the question? Hopefully. All right. Any more questions? These are good questions coming in.
Yep, that seems to answer the question. Oh yeah, go ahead.
All right, just another question from Kev. Also, how would you have multiple identities for the same host via .ssh?
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah. So you'll see what I did here. Let me go back to the guide. Is I added a prefix, right? Normally, if you don't specify, it will just call it ID_RSA. So if you look in your .ssh folder right now, you might even already have something like that in there. The way you can distinguish it is basically when you generate the keys, you name it something that will be able to distinguish it, right? So I'm going to paste that in here. We'll use we'll name it something that we can remember. Like if it was my Raspberry Pi, I could name it Pi. If you're generating keys for GitHub or Bitbucket or what's the other one? GitLab, then I like to put that there as well, like GitHub, and then you know which key is for which, right? And in your host config file, you can then manage the different keys. So I'm saying for GitHub, use this key, right? For CSE, I want to use this key. And that way, when you're logging into that host, github.com, it will remember to look for that identity file. Yeah, that's a good question. Was there another one? No more? Okay, cool, yeah. Yeah, feel free to unmute and jump in with questions if you want. But keep them coming as well, that's good. Okay. So another little trick I'd like to share with you. Here's a nice one. So this XForwarding is quite useful because it allows you to actually use graphical programs over SSH. So if you want to use Gedit or some other graphical program that's on the lab machines, that's okay, you can do that. So what you want to do is, when you're SSHing, add the -y command. Now on Mac, you'll need to get, does it say here? You need to get X11, Xquartz, sorry, yeah, this one. So you download this and install that, and it will allow you to have these graphical programs over SSH. And so what you do is you'd SSH in to CSE, and if you set it up like that, you can just do it like that. And I know that's not going to work, but then once you're on CSE, you just run Gedit, whatever you want, and it should open in a window with full graphics and everything on your machine. Xquartz for Mac. We've also got, there's another one for Windows, X11 for Windows, and it works with PuTTY as well. Yes, Xming. So if you're using PuTTY, you can have this as well, or any of those other terminal emulators. There are ways to get this working, where you can have graphical programs running over SSH. It's just an alternative to VNC. I think it's actually a bit faster in many cases.
Carl, just another question from the chat.
Yes.
How did you get those fancy file icons in your terminal?
Yes, good question. Okay, so if we go back to our page here, how did I get these? So what I'm using is the ls command, right? I'm actually using a replacement command. So there's a few, this is one of the pages that isn't as fully fleshed out, but there's a few different replacement commands for ls that you could try out. The one I'm using is called exa. So if we look at exa, exa command line. Oh, they even have a website. Let's check out their website. So basically, it's a colorful ls, right? It's an ls that gives you colors based on the type of file it is and whether it has execute permissions, and it can even give you Git information as well as file size, all of this stuff, which is a bit nicer to look at than your default ls. And one of the options they have is to add icons. Yeah. So that's how I did that. And there's also others like, there's one called LSD, command line. Yeah, so it's another alternative, and there's one called color ls. They'll do similar things, and yeah, they allow you to add these icons. Now, to get the icons, basically the icon is part of the font. So the reason that's working is because I'm using a nerd font. Like I explained before. So you want to choose one of these fonts here that have the icons. We have all these icons, lots of icons. You want to choose one of those. The one thing that is good to keep in mind with those icons is while they look pretty cool, right? If you set up icons on, say, the lab machine, and then you have to sit at the lab machine and use it in the lab machine terminal, you might not have installed the font. And in that case, they will come up with question marks. So I'll show you what that looks like. So that's something to weigh up if you want to go down the icon route, right? Here's a basic terminal, I guess. So this one is using a font that doesn't support, gosh, that's really small. This one's using a font that doesn't support icons. So if I ls here, you'll see it just comes up with question marks, right? So that's something to weigh up. Of course, it is possible to install fonts on CSE. I know because I've done it. I installed Inconsolata on my account, and it's not too hard. You just have to Google how to do it, basically. Download the font, rebuild the font cache, and then the key thing is that you have to log out and then log back in before the font will be available. But yeah, and that's how I got those icons. Yeah, good question. Okay, so were there any more questions?
That was it.
Cool. All right, so I'll quickly jump back to one more quick tip on this SSH before we move on to the next thing. How are we going for time? Cool. So there's one really easy tip. You might notice that when you log into CSE, you get a message. The message says something like, don't do bad stuff, or, there will be consequences. And if you've read and agreed to that message before, right, you might not have to see it every time you SSH in, right? So what you can do is first SSH into your lab machine, then just run touch .hush login like this, right? And now the touch command actually just creates a blank file, or its actual purpose is to update the modification time of a file. But now if we ls hush login, right, we'll see we have this blank .hush login file. Now, as long as that's present in your home directory, you won't see the message, right? Neat trick. And if you want that message back again, because you like to read the terms and conditions every time you SSH in, all you have to do is delete hush login. And remember, I'm not doing it because I didn't set up SSH before, or I thought I did, but I didn't. But you have to SSH in first before you create this file. Yeah, this file has to exist on your CSE account. Cool. All right, so let's go back here. Let's close a few of these tabs. We've got a lot going on. Okay, so I'm looking at the poll again, looking at what we were interested in. People were interested in, okay, a package manager. Package manager might be good because I talked about these things like Exa, right? All these other programs that you can get, but how can you actually get them? So this is something I want to share with you guys. So if we go back to the index here, package manager. I think that one's a pretty important one. So the package manager that I use is on Mac is called Brew, Homebrew, and it's actually also available for Linux. And I use it on my Raspberry Pi, which is running Debian. And I've also used it on the CSE lab machine accounts as well, although you have to be careful because you have limited disk space, and installing lots of packages can fill up that disk space pretty fast. But it's pretty useful. It has some really nice advantages. And why is that? Well, if I want to install something, say, what's something I don't have installed? Say I want to install color ls, which I don't have. I can go brew info color ls. So, okay, looks like they don't have it. Let me find another one. What about Ag Silver Searcher, which is another program? Nope. I have to, okay. I didn't get it right. I have to search Ag. And it would tell me packages then matched Ag. And I want, well, looks like there's one called Ag. Okay. So I'll just brew install Ag. And it will go and fetch it and download it. What's actually doing is it builds the software from the source. Instead of downloading a pre-built binary, right? It builds it from the source using these formulas. And you might ask, why is that an advantage? Well, it means that you don't need to put that binary in. You don't have to mix it in with your system packages, right? You can keep that completely separate. And that's actually what Brew does. It puts all of the packages in a, it builds all the software into a folder, and that's in your home directory, right? I think it's, I've forgotten where it is. Oh, user local seller. Okay, so it's actually not your home directory, but you can configure it to be your home directory. And that's really nice because it means all your packages that you've installed with Brew are in one place and they're not interfering with your system packages. So if you wanted to install a newer version of Python, you could do it through Brew and it wouldn't mess up the system Python. So all the things that rely on the Python that comes with your operating system, they will still work, right? And really easy if you want to like delete all the Brew packages, you just delete the folder that had all the Brew packages because they're not mixed together with your other packages. It also doesn't require sudo, which is like essential if you're working on an environment like the CSE lab computers. The downside of building all the software is some packages like GCC, some really big ones, they're going to take a while to build. So that's the downside. Most things are pretty fast though. Yeah. So I've got some simple commands here. You might wonder, how do I get Brew? How do I install it? It's pretty easy. All you have to do is go to the website, which is linked here, and you just copy this command and then just run it in your terminal. And that will go to the Homebrew GitHub and it will run the install script, which downloads everything you need and doesn't need sudo. So that's great. Any questions about that so far?
Oh yeah, just another question. Is there a Brew? Also, what is alternative for Windows?
Yes, that's a good question. So on Windows, I mean, my recommendation on Windows is that you use a Linux terminal. So like WSL, there's even WSL2 I've heard now. And what this is it's actually putting Ubuntu core, or you can choose another distribution of Linux. It puts that on your Windows computer and it runs it more or less natively, right? It's not emulating, it's using some fancy stuff under the hood to actually run Linux code. That's what I'd recommend, because once you do that, then you'll be able to use all the Linux tools on Windows. But if you are using PowerShell or using some other Windows thing that doesn't really support Linux, because if you do use this WSL, then you can use Linux Brew. You can use Homebrew because it supports Linux, right? If you don't have that and you're using CMD or PowerShell or something like that, there is one called Chocolatey, right? I don't have that much experience with it, but I've linked all the documentation and how to configure it here and their website. And it's more or less the same thing. In fact, it works even not just for command line programs. It also works for whatever you want, browsers. Yeah, whatever you want. So check out their website. They have lots of information there. Yeah. Good question. Any more questions?
Yep, just another one. Does something that works on Linux work on Mac?
Yes, that's a great question. In sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Basically, you have to look on a case-by-case basis, but it's a good question. If we look up that color ls example that I had before, it might not be so, maybe they don't say if it works on Mac. Oh yeah, they do say it works on Mac. Sometimes these GitHub projects will not say, they'll just assume that you know if it works on whichever platform. But usually if you look at the install, it will say whether it works, like it'll have installation instructions for Mac or Linux, and it will say only supported on Linux. It's not that often that something will be supported on Linux only, in my experience, which is why Mac's really, really nice for me. Best of both worlds. Although I do love Linux. Good question. Basically, the answer is sometimes. Most of the time. All right. Any more questions before we move on?
Nope, that was it.
Good. All right. Keep those questions coming. So let me go back to our page here. I've lost it already. Okay. So I thought maybe I would go through some things that you can do with Git. Actually, I wonder if that's going to be useful. I'm wondering how many people have used Git. Maybe just put a thumbs up if you have a thumbs up. Do you have that in Zoom? If you use Git. Nice. Okay. Cool. Okay. So it's about half. Yeah. I think it's useful. I've got some cool stuff for Git. So maybe I'll go into it. Maybe I'll look at this cool one first because it's quick. But did you know that you can actually have a full browser inside your terminal? It's pretty crazy. And it even supports JavaScript and to some extent images. Let me show you. It's called Browsh, like spelled like this, like brow sh, and it has some instructions for how to install it here. Oop, that's actually the wrong link. I'll fix that up later. But for example, we run that, and it'll start up, and we have a browser. Like the images are going to be blocky because it is a terminal. But if, for example, you're you want to have your lab work open in one page, you can go like fine, and it works with the mouse as well, as long as your terminal supports mouse. It's a bit difficult. 241. Here we go. So you could have your lab open in one page, and then your code in another terminal, and you could work like that if you want. Not saying it's always the best option, but it is possible, and supports JavaScript. even supports some video. So yeah, if you're interested in that, check it out.
Callum, another question from Kev.
Yep.
What's the best way to use Linux on Mac? Is there a headless way to do so?
Yeah, that's a good question. So headless way to use Linux on Mac. I'd say Docker. So there's a thing called Docker, and it's used by many companies because it's basically like kind of like a virtual machine, but it uses some special stuff to kind of run natively. And it keeps things in a package as well. So like, here you download it. It actually works cross-platform. It's not just for Mac. But what it will allow you to do is have like a Linux little container is what they called, a Linux container on your Mac system. So I can say Docker, Docker ls maybe? No, I don't remember all the commands. But it's been a while since I used it actually, to be honest. But it allows you to, have these Linux containers that you can just do Docker run, and it's like Debian or whatever your container is called. And then it will start up a Debian Linux container, and then you've got your Linux machine there. Yep, it's not gonna work because I didn't download. I don't have the full guide for you there, but if you Google how to use Docker or Docker tutorial, you'll see there's plenty of stuff teaching you how to do that. Cool. That's a good question. Any more?
No, no more.
All right, so we'll jump back to Git, right? And if you haven't used Git before, hopefully this will give you an idea of how you can learn Git a little bit easier. Where did I put source control? Here we go. So this page is actually pretty big. I've added a lot of stuff to it because I think using Git is pretty important. We won't have time to go through it all, but if you're interested, you can look into it later. Okay, so Git is for managing, I guess if I was to explain it in simple terms, it allows you to take snapshots of your code, right? And then if you need to, you can jump back to those snapshots and you can compare between snapshots and see what's changed. Yeah, I think that's how I would describe it. So I use Git every day. If you look at GitHub, which is a place that stores your Git snapshots, right? Let's see here. If I go to my GitHub, it stores all my repositories, and you'll even see that this guide is stored on GitHub. So it is also a Git repository, and you have some green that shows you which days you committed on. You can see there's a lot. I'm using Git every day for work, even on weekends sometimes. You might think, wow, the guy has no life. But I have the command line, so there's that. What we'll do is we'll look at some ways that you can make Git look a bit nicer on your computer in the command line. And that will be, I think, the key to understanding how to use Git better. Because I think there's a couple of pathways. I was talking about this with some of my colleagues, and to really understand Git when you're learning, there's a couple of ways. You can just use the command line and try and figure it out, bash your way into it. Or you could use a GUI like Source Tree or GitHub Desktop, something like that. And that will help you understand what's happening when you commit or when you log, stuff like that. I'd say there's another option, and that option is to make Git nice enough with just a few little config things here and there so that you're happy enough to use it in the terminal, because the terminal commands for Git you'll have everywhere. And in my opinion, it's nicer than the GUIs. So let's jump in and have a look. The most important command, I think, in Git is the git status command. So if I go into the repository for this guide, it's called CLI Tools Workshop 20. Okay, so I'm in a Git repository now, and you know what? Actually, I think there's a better example. Okay, so I'm in a repository now, and it has a few different things here. And if I run git status, right, this is the output that we get, right? And it's really long. It has all this extra stuff, right? Which is really great for when you're starting out, because you want to understand how to use the commands, and you can use these extra hints. But once you've learned the git add command, you don't need to see it every time you run git status. So there's a git status -s flag, which is short, stands for short, right? We've got that here. And what that will do is it will abbreviate it, and it'll give you some symbols, right? So if we compare it with git status, it says we've got a modified file, a new file, a modified file that's not staged, and a file that's untracked, right? And we can see that's reflected here. We've got a modified file that's unstaged. We've got a file that's added and staged. And we got a modified file that's also staged, and then one that's not tracked, right? Basically, this status command, I think, is one of the most useful, because you need to be able to see what the state of your repository is as you're working with Git. Otherwise, you can end up accidentally committing things that you didn't mean to, or you can be using a command and you'll think it does one thing, but it actually does another thing, right? So it's important to be able to get an overview of what it looks like. And so, since this is like a command that I use all the time, I will actually alias it. So basically, if we jump down to here, you can add aliases to your terminal, right? Like this. So alias, so we have the command echo hello, right? Simple enough, it just echoes hello. We could make this shorter. We can say alias hi to equal echo hello. So now whenever we type hi, it will run the full command, right? Now, this is kind of useful, but if we start a new terminal, right, and we run hi, there's no command, right? So what we want to do is we want to add it to our shell config file. So that's either bashrc if you're using bash, or it's zshrc if you're using zsh. And the way that you can tell is if you go echo shell, capital letters, it will tell you which one you're using. And currently I'm using zsh. So I would add, do vim zshrc, and then I could add, it has to be in your home folder, by the way, alias hi equals, I'm not actually using the one in my home folder. So going to home folder, shrc, I'll go to the bottom, say, just for argument's sake, and add alias, hi equals echo hello. Cool. And now if I restart my terminal, and I type hi, it will have that command. So you can put all these aliases in your RC file, and that will make it easier. So one of the aliases I have is I have this alias here, which changes S to be the git status command. That way it's only one letter and I can just always mash it and see what's going on, right? Yeah, that's one of my pro tips, is the git status command. Now, I've added some extra stuff here so you can learn how to make that git status even fancier. By default, if we do this, we get some information like how long it's been since we last committed, but we also don't have an idea of how many lines have changed in each file. And if you use this diff stat instructions here, you can get that. So it'll look like this. It'll have you, you'll get 128 lines have changed here, 4 lines have changed here, 4 lines have changed, and you get an indication like that, which is kind of nice, I think. Yeah, any questions so far about that?
Nothing.
Cool, all right. Another one that's really useful is the log command. So if you've ever done git log before, you'll see we have a list of all our commits, right, that we've ever done. Now, if you grab this command here and put that in your git config, if you follow the instructions that I've written out here, then you can get a colorful git log command that looks like this, right? And it's a bit easier to read. Shows you more on a single screen. Yeah, so we've got some more configuration like that here, but I'll jump to the interesting stuff. How long have we got left? Are we over time already? Maybe.
Yeah. So on the event, we have it recorded as 11 to 12, but we don't have any, I guess, hard deadlines. So you're free to go over time as much as you want.
Okay, cool. I might just go another 10, 15 minutes, but feel free to drop off if you lost interest or it's too much to take in one go. I understand that. Okay, so what we got here is some other git aliases. I use a lot of aliases that make using git a lot easier for me, as well as, so my kind of workflow will be, I'll do a status and then I'll say, oh, I want to know whether I should add this file that's in my status. So I'll go like git diff control P5 JSON, right? And actually that's alias to GD, so it's nice and easy. So I can see, oh, I've got that change on control P5 JSON. Let me do that again, control P5 JSON. Cool, I've got this change. I'm ready to commit this. So I'll add it like this. I'll go add. Normally you can do git add, but I've got an alias that's set up just like this, add. And then here's a trick. This one's not even related to git, but see, I have a file here, right? And I can't be bothered to type it out again, to be honest, right? The last parameter of the previous command can be inserted in the current command if you hit Alt and full stop on the keyboard. So that's like option dot or meta dot, right? If I hit that, it will insert the last parameter from the last command, which is really useful if you got a really long file path, right? So I'll add that. And the key thing I've got with these aliases that I've set up is to save me having to press S all the time, after I do any relevant Git operation, it will just print out the status anyway, right? Which I think is kind of useful. Because now we can see that the control p5.json file has gone green. It means it's been added to the stage, right? Yeah. Cool. So there's a couple of useful command line tools that you can use with Git, and mostly these ones are focused on diffing, right? Understanding the difference. So here, this Git diff that I printed out, it actually would probably look a bit different from the one that you might be used to, right? If I go here, I've got screenshots because I undid my config. This is what it would look like by default. And it could look even worse if you don't have color enabled, right? So that color is kind of necessary, I think, so you can see what has changed. But we can do even better than just this. So if we look at this one called diff so fancy, which is the one I'm using here, we can install it with brew. So I've added all the install commands. You can go brew install diff so fancy, and then there's a link on how to set it up. All you have to do is add or run this in your command to set it up. Run this in your terminal. And then what you'll be able to do is just run your git diff like you did before, but now you'll get these nice colors. It gets rid of the plus signs that you don't really need if you've got color, right? Makes it a bit easier to read. It doesn't print out all this crazy stuff at the start as well. Right. There are some alternatives as well, like this Delta one is quite nice. It allows you to have like side-by-side diffs like this. So that's kind of nice too. And yeah, I've included some other options. Cool, and you can even use Vim to diff, which has some benefits because then you can like update the files that you're diffing as well. Here's some nice ones for advanced users. If you want to diff JSON files, that's possible as well. But the problem with JSON files is JSON files look something like this, right? Let me see if I can make this bigger. Nope, not really. And just open image new tab, okay. Looks kind of like this. You've got keys and values. And the problem is, if you're diffing a JSON file, it might not always be in the same order, right? But you're not interested in the order. You want to see what the differences are. If you try and use a normal diff program, it'll get really confused if the order has changed. It'll think it won't be smart enough to figure out that, you know, to ignore the order of keys in a JSON file. So that's okay because we have this JD command, which helps you diff JSON files, and it ignores the order when diffing. So it'll only tell you what the differences are. So this diff here is the difference between those two files. It's the same as this diff here, but it's a lot easier to read. You can see which keys have changed straight away. Cool. There's some other tools like git grep. Git grep is a really fast grep program if you want to try and find something that is tracked by Git. It can be even faster than normal grep or some other search programs for large repos. Yeah, I've just added some other tools here that you might be interested to browse if you're into Git stuff. But I guess the one last thing that I want to touch on before we finish, and that's kind of a really big one, and that's one that's come up in the questions already, is how did I get this terminal looking fancy like this? How did I get this SSH set up, right? got you covered. So if you look at shell, I've written some information here on how you can get a terminal to look like this as well. If you want the abbreviated version, basically it's a combination of this one, which is an out-of-the-box kind of config that can get you started with ZSH really quickly, and All My ZSH, which is a ZSH framework which adds colors and themes that you can customize. And there's lots of information on how to use it. It's really popular. A lot of people use it. And there are many different themes that you can choose as well. And then combine that with a prompt. Now, what is the prompt? The prompt is what appears on each line when you're entering commands. And it can have a lot of useful information. The prompt that I use is power level 10K, and it's got heaps of features, and it's really fast as well. So recommend looking into that one. I've got all the details here on how you can set it up and some alternatives that you might like to check out as well, right? Depending on what you think looks nice. Then to get the extra stuff, like you'll notice I have syntax highlighting on my commands, like that. If a nice one I have is if a file path is valid, it will underline it as well. And I've got that using this plugin called Fast Syntax Highlighting.
¿Ah, sí? Pero depende de la dirección, porque sí, yo creo que es completamente azul, entonces eso no creo que sea muy grande.
Sorry, was that a question? Couldn't quite hear. No. All right. Feel free to butt in, but yeah, can you hear? Yes.
Is ZSH a terminal emulator?
Ah, that's a good question. Yeah. No, it's actually not a terminal emulator. It's a shell, right? The shell that you're probably used to using on a Linux computer is called bash, right? And the terminal emulator is the application that you use to run your shell in. Like I'm using OSX terminal or iTerm. That's the terminal emulator. I see how you, yeah, I should have been more clear with that. But the shell is what interprets your commands, basically. And ZSH is the shell I'm using to interpret my commands. It's nice because it's backwards compatible with bash, and it's actually the default on Mac computers now. So it's a nice one. And it supports these plugins that allow you to have like these auto suggestions, the syntax highlighting, the completions, stuff like that. It's not the only one though. There's also a shell called Fish, which is worth checking out. It has some really nice features as well. Yeah, but if you want to get set up with a pretty terminal like this, then check out ZSH and check out the All My ZSH, this one here. That's probably the best place to start, the easiest place to start. Yeah. And then as you get comfortable with that, if you want to go further, then check out some of these other things listed here. Cool. Were there any more questions?
Yep. So following on, how did you set the terminal prompt to have the Git branch and all the other information?
Yes, that's a good question. So this here, this Git information, this is in my prompt. And this comes from power level 10K. So that's this one here. If you look here, you can see all the details on how to use it. Notice now that that's actually a mistake as well, but the link should be correct. Nope, it's not. Okay. Well, if you Google power level 10K, you'll get it. Let me just check, is that one right? Yep. So it allows you to have a lot of different things. You can put like all these decorations in your terminal. Things like if I have a command that takes a long time, like sleep for 6 seconds, right? It will tell me that when it finishes, that the command took 6 seconds to run, which is kind of nice. And it tells me the Git status. So like the down arrow means that I need to pull because there's some changes on the remote. The up arrow means that I have changes on local that haven't been pushed. Plus means I've got some things committed or staged rather. And question is same as here, untracked files. And if you look through this power level 10K, it has guides on how to set it up. And it's actually quite nice because you can, there's a configuration wizard. So it goes through and says, oh, do you want it to be a multi-line prompt? Like, or do you want it to be one line? Do you want fancy symbols in it? Yes or no? And this kind of stuff. So I can recommend looking into that if you want to get this fancy prompt with all the stuff in it. It has many, many features, like it abbreviates the directory. It, I even have mine set up so that if I have nested shells, it makes a number of hash symbols here to illustrate how many nested shells I have, which can be useful sometimes. Many, many features. Yeah. Here's a quick feature, right? If you're using Vim, right? Let's see. Using Vim on a file here, doesn't matter what file. Doesn't even matter if it's Vim. It can be any program, any terminal program. If you press Control Z, right? I'm pressing Control Z now. It will suspend the program, right? It'll put it in the background. So you can check what's currently suspended with the jobs command. And you'll see in my prompt here, I've set it up so that it tells me I've got one background job. Now, if you go FG, which kind of stands for foreground, and you do that, you'll jump right back into Vim or whatever program you had suspended. It's kind of useful. If you want to quickly toggle between terminal and your editor, can be used in lots of other scenarios as well. But yeah, just pointing out that in my prompt, it shows that. Again, if you want this specific prompt, I'm happy to help you set that up. It's all the details for it are in my .dot files. I would first of all get this power level 10K because that's what I'm using. Then I just have, see I've on the page here, not on this one, on this one, I've added what config file is used. So this prompt power level 10K uses this config file. And if you look that up in my .dot files, you'll see the settings that I used to get my prompt to look just like that, right? Looks like a lot of code there, but it's actually mostly comments. So yeah, not too bad. Cool. Were there any other questions left over?
Oh yeah, finally, do you have stuff on Bash as well?
Yeah, sure thing. If you want to use Bash, that's cool. A lot of the things that work with SSH can also work with Bash. Some of the fancier stuff, like the prompt, won't work, but you can get a nice looking Bash prompt anyway. Like if you Google fancy Bash prompt, there are ways you can get it looking, really nice. Just Google for a guide that will walk you through. Find one that looks how you want yours to look, and then add to that. But you'll see I also have a large section here in this shell file on things that are built into Bash, because there's plenty built in. Before you even add all this stuff, colors and fancy prompts, really cool, but there's lots of features like that background, foreground, suspend feature. That's in Bash as well. That works out of the box. The feature where you can get the last word on the previous command by pressing Alt dot, right? That works in Bash as well. And there are lots of shortcuts that I've added here for that work in both Bash and in ZSH. So yeah, that's a great question. Plenty of stuff you can do in Bash. Just ZSH has some extra power which allow you to use these plugins like for autocomplete and some interactive searches through history, stuff like that. Cool. Great. So we'll finish up soon, but any final questions?
No, not so far.
Great. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you've learned something. Hopefully I haven't flooded you. I know I went through a lot of stuff really quickly, and that's why I put this document together, because there's no way you can remember all the stuff I just rattled off. But maybe I've given you a glimpse of what kind of stuff is possible, and whet your appetite and given you the jumping off point for starting out with your command line workflow. So remember, if you want to get to this page, it's callumhoward.com/CLI-workshop. The link will be on the Facebook page, and I think it's also been emailed to you. And I'll also put links on the Facebook page for the CSC Vim users group, which you can join and ask me questions anytime. And what was the final link? No, I think that's it. Oh yes, my dot files. I'll link on the Facebook page to my dot files as well. You can get that going callumhoward.com, clicking on the Git icon and going to dot files here. Yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. Yeah, see you next time.